Hi, guys. I'm Sarah, and I serve here at Victory in the church office. We're so glad that you tuned in to today's message, and I believe that something in this sermon is going to help encourage you and help you take the next step forward in your faith journey. Before we get into it, make sure you subscribe to the channel so that way you never miss a video. Now let's hear from the sermon.
So when we're talking about the villains of the Bible, we're going to have a variety of different characters and people. Some that are going to be hidden, like Satan, we talked about last week, who's always behind the scenes. But then you have people like Pharaoh, who's very much in front. He's one of the leaders of the ancient world. And in our text this morning, as we see in the book of Exodus, we just have a name, Pharaoh. Which one is it? We really can't tell. Doing all the research, and nobody's, Charlton Heston will tell you it's King Ramses, the guy he grew up with in a variety of movies, but we really don't know. It could be a variety of the different pharaohs, but I'd like to think there's one, and I'm not going to try and pronounce their names because you've got Tutankhamun, you got Ramses, and after that it's a bunch of, I can't pronounce them. But there's one guy who finally says, who almost leads a religious reform saying, we're giving up on our gods. And that kind of sounds like somebody that would have experienced the Exodus, or at least his son, because we know at the end of this story, Pharaoh dies in the sea. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. We associate it often with the Exodus. We think about Moses and the Ten Commandments. And we're not going to focus on that today. What we're going to focus on is simply who Pharaoh was, why did he do the things that he do, and ultimately the battle between false gods and the one true real God. Now, what makes Pharaoh a villain? It's pretty obvious from what our reading for today is that you saw an overseer who was completely unreasonable. Some of you may have a boss like this or have ever worked with somebody like this who just had completely unrealistic expectations, and then just because they didn't like you, just make it almost impossible for you to succeed. So that's just one example of working with a bad boss. But then the villainy, other examples of it are from the very first story in Exodus chapter 1, where the Hebrews are growing and their numbers are growing, and he orders that the babies be thrown into the water. His murder of Hebrew baby boys. That's more than just your normal bad boss. When you do that, you're telling a group of people, I am in charge, I am in control, and I am in control of your future. And I'm going to remove your future by killing your children. And when I remove your future, I'm going to remove your hope. And there's a fantastic story about how the Hebrew midwives, he said, you need to kill them right when they're being born, and they wouldn't do it. And then they just said, forget it. You guys aren't doing the job, because who wants to do that? He said, just start throwing them in the water. And then you have Moses, who was tucked away, and he was born into this time of trauma, this time of villainy, and he was hidden. And his mom hid him for several months before he got too big, and then they floated him out on the water, and then eventually he landed in Pharaoh's household. So you have the murder of the Hebrew babies, you have his abuse of the Hebrew slaves, of beating and demanding and all that. And then you also have the abusive culture of Egypt that's just created, and it's created by the pharaohs. Because the pharaohs could stop any of it in a moment, but they kept it up. They kept it up, and they kept it up. And it's almost, you could call it genocide. Our people are greater than your people. Your people are, at most, worthy of being slaves. That's the best that you can do. Now, when you take an individual, and we can just say, okay, he's a literary character, but we know people like this in our lives. Maybe not to this extent, but sometimes you got to think, why would a person do things like this? Well, one thing is, in Egyptian culture, he thinks he's a god. He thinks he's a god. He is in God with, by the way, if you're wondering what these boxes are, this is a large pantheon of Egyptian gods, okay? That they had many, many gods, but Pharaoh was the biggest. Because he's been told he's a god. He thinks he's a god. But then you take that, a person who thinks they're a god, and you mix it and combine it with narcissistic tendencies. And we use that a lot now. I hear that phrase a lot. People, it's a classic narcissist, or it's this. We're getting more in terms of psychology. And the psychological narcissistic tendency would be selfishness. There's a sense of entitlement, a lack of empathy, a need for admiration. That's characterizing this personality type. So you start mixing all that together. A person who thinks he's a god, a person who thinks only of himself. And how do you get to this point? Is that, and this is a very, very, I don't want you to miss this. He has been told this all of his life. You are a god. His father told him, you are a god. He's told his own son, you are a god. You're going to be a god. You either are one or you're going to be one. All the pyramids are built for the pharaohs who wouldn't die, even though they would be mummified and they're filled with riches for the afterlife. That these were all built to honor not a god, but the gods, the pharaohs. That's what the pyramids are for. And all this is happening all his life. And I just wanted to raise a little warning red flag, because we know that all the events of the Bible, we compare them up to events of now, and we can look at it and go, what we see, that he's been told this all of his life, and when we do this to our children, and we've seen this happen, we cry about kids who have a sense of entitlement. Well, who entitled them? When we don't tell them that there's anything wrong, we're constantly saying things. It's good to encourage, but you are owed the world. And we've seen people in our own lives who have no concept that they could do anything wrong because they've never been told. They've been treated as if they're gods and they do no wrong. And then they become destructive human beings. So then what we're going to really see then in all this, and as we kind of go through this story, what we're going to see is this is really a story about false gods and the real God. And the most dangerous false god is the god of self, the idol of self. The Egyptians have many gods. We have many gods. Jesus boils it down so on his understanding of what a false god is and how you can tell what's a false god or not. He really boils it down in Matthew chapter 6 when he says, you cannot serve both God and money. He kind of lays it all out there like that, and expounding on the word money. A false idol is really anything or anyone that you put your trust into for your hope, your future, your prosperity. Anything you go to that you're thinking about, this is my prosperity, is linked to this. So that's money. It's all prosperity we look is like that. And he says all the idols, all the things in your life that you link to prosperity, that is a false idol. It could be a job. If I just have this job, I'll prosperous. Have this role, I'll do this. A bank statement. It could be achievements. It could be a person. If I get this person, or relationships, your parents, your kids, a whole variety of it. We look at, if I have these things, I'll be prosperous. And the most dangerous idol, false idol, is the idol of self. And in killing the Hebrew babies of the Hebrews, Pharaoh told them he controls the future and he controls their hope. So put your hope and trust in me because I'm in charge. You deserve to worship me. I deserve your worship. So when Moses goes up to him, and we know Moses get called out of the desert into the wilderness, and God challenges him and says, I need you to go to Pharaoh, and I need you to lead my people out of Egypt. So when he goes up to Pharaoh, and he says, let my people go, he's not just challenged. It's not a prophet and king and just this simple challenge. There's a lot more that goes into this than just a simple challenge of let my people go. He's not just challenging a narcissistic jerk, but he's really challenging an entire belief system. And he's challenging Pharaoh's core to let my people go. Because in their first confrontation, Moses was worried. How in the world, why would he listen to me? Why would he talk to me? What do I have? And then God tells him, well, take your staff and you're going to throw it down and it's going to become a snake. Okay, I'll do that. He gets in front of Moses. He gets in front of Pharaoh. They're talking, who are these two idiots over here? And he's like, I got my staff. Throws it down, becomes a snake. Now, at that point, I'm done. I get that. I see that. Somebody comes in here and does that. If anything, you want that? Okay, go ahead. Take your people out. But then in the Egyptian history, we see it, that they're able to recreate this. And by the way, Bible scholars never argue this. They never argue it, like whether or not this really could have happened or not. They just, there. And so snake comes out. They also recreate this, and the snake comes out. But then they replicate it, and then it's probably a king cobra. Scholars think it's probably a king cobra because that is the snake of the Pharaohs. What's on top of Pharaoh's head? He's a king cobra. And then it says the snake of Moses' staff then ate Pharaoh's snakes. Think about the symbolism of that. The Lord is going to win. And it's a challenge to the king cobra, to Pharaoh. You're going to lose. And it's this shepherd and his brother, who is a slave, coming to tell you that. So this was a challenge. And then what we'll see then is that you'll see as the challenge, as the plagues come and that are like a series of attacks that are systematically breaking down the idols of Egypt. The gods of Egypt, each is tied to prosperity. The very first plague was against Hapi, the Egyptian god of the Nile. The Egyptian god of the Nile is the Nile. He was revered as one of the most important gods in ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptian civilization was highly dependent upon the river waters to grow their crops and sustain life. We know this. We know the Nile. We know it. We know that this was a plain of wonderful abundance and fertile land. We know this. Even today, we know it. It's not a legend. And they had their god of the river. Name is Hapi. And the very first plague is turning the water of the Nile into blood. Not just water, not just that water, but all of the water. They were digging wells on the side of the river trying to find water, but it was all blood. The water in their pots at homes, blood. Everything had turned into blood. And turning into blood turns it into poison, killing the fish, poisoning the ground. And after each plague, the magicians tried to replicate it, and they could, which is, again, they don't argue it. They replicated somehow in a little bowl, turning water into blood. But on a very smaller scale. But as the plagues went on, Pharaoh would seem to soften, and he would beg Moses to stop the plague, but then he would harden his heart. Hardness and dullness of heart. This is a spiritual condition of persistent unresponsiveness to God and His Word, which can rise to the level of rejection and hostility. Remember, he did not know the Lord. I don't know who this guy is. Why would I listen to him? And then, Hoppy gets knocked down. And his brother. Okay, Hoppy gets knocked down. So what? We've got more. We've got more. You've lost something in your life. Okay, we still have more. Or we argue it away. We say it was a coincidence that this happened. Or we can fix it. We can adjust it. We can make it happen again. And we explain things away when things are pulled away from us. The ancient text also talks about, the proverb talks about when you're a dullness of heart, it's like associated with beast-like behavior. Like as an animal lacks perception, spiritual perception. So the senseless person has no respect or consideration of God. So the Pharaoh is reduced to being a brute and hates reproof. And it just keeps going on. You think about all the different things, whether it be Takis or your food that you like, or it keeps going through your technology, Kleenex, you got your feelings, whatever you can shop on Amazon, whatever you've got from Starbucks, so that's part of your deal. You have to do that every single day or you can't survive. How many people have that addiction that have to do that every single day? Now, see, there you go. All right, you've got... I'm going to kick this, Mike. All right, and it's full of stuff. Maybe it's full of all different things. But you've got the images of every time, the frogs, the gnats that come, the magicians said the things that go, the frogs and the gnats, everything that is sent by the plagues is meant to destroy the prosperity of the land. And when we talk about the frogs coming, frogs are in your soup. Frogs are in your bed. Frogs are everywhere. Gnats, we know they're disgusting and they're everywhere. And at this point in time, the magicians give up. The magicians at this point have always been trying to replicate, and if this one, they just go, we're done. We're out. And they actually start saying, this can only come from the hand of God. But Pharaoh is continuing to be hardened of heart. He continues to be hardened of heart. And then God gets the cattle. There's the disease that is sent to cattle. There's the boils and the sores that come, now affecting your physical pain, but also your physical appearance. All of this is coming on them. And after the boils and the sores, then it says the Lord hardened his heart. Pharaoh's been hardening his heart, and now God is confirming it, which is a very sad truth. It's a very sad truth that if living in constant rejection, God will finally solidify your choice. Romans, Paul writes, says, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes to see, not to see, to be blind, and ears to hear not, down to this very day. And this is a condition that is confirming this constant rejection of God. That finally God hardens the heart he can't believe. And then comes the hail, and then comes the locusts, and the locusts come in a few different waves. First wave comes in and gets like the top layer of the crops. The second wave gets down to everything. Destroys everything. And then darkness. The plague of darkness. Do you know who next to Pharaoh, who's the top god in the Egyptian pantheon? Ra, the sun god, who is listed not just as the god of the sun, but who is the creator of existence. And the plague of darkness, the Lord, who he did not know, could block out even Ra, the sun god. Boom. But Pharaoh's heart was still hardened. And the last one to be knocked down, the last idol that needed to be knocked down, is the idol of self. And this is a battle that we all face. In his mind, I imagine, as long as he lived, there was hope. As long as I exist, there is hope. And as Pharaoh was God in his own eyes, his son is also a god, the next Pharaoh. And his son's death, by God's judgment, proved that he is not a god. And I look at this box right here. What does it say? Lazy boy. Isn't this the goal of so much of our lives? Isn't it? To gain enough stuff so that we can be lazy, so that we can live in comfort, and where we control the world around us. Okay, watch out, Benita. And that night, the final idol was knocked down. Jesus would say, whoever, 2 different times, he would say things like, to the fat man, or I call him the fat man, I'm assuming, a guy who grew his wealth into such abundance that one year he had such a beautiful crop that he said, I'm going to double my store barns and I keep it all to myself. Jesus we call him the rich fool, because on that very night, the Lord demanded his life. You're not in charge. You're not in charge. You think about the events from yesterday. I apologize for not mentioning it yesterday. The events from yesterday and the assassination attempt on our presidential candidate, former President Trump, perpetrated by someone who thought that this life is all there is. You think about that. Somebody so desperate to try to kill a man saying, this is life, this is all there is, so this guy needs to die. But all the political rancor, think about all the rancor that we have because we're fighting for this. We're fighting to be the rich fool. We're fighting for these things. We can't live peacefully. We can't do these things because we're slaves to other things, except to the God of peace. Because we all think we're right. We all think we should be in charge. When Jesus says this, who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today, gone tomorrow, and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And you do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink, and do not worry about it. Don't worship other gods. Don't look to other things to chase these things. The pagan world runs after such things. And your Father in heaven knows you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. So we seek God's kingdom first. Again, we said a false idol, different idols. What are false idols? Whoever we put our trust in for prosperity to lead our life, and we get distracted by so many things. Was God who says in the book of Jeremiah, I know the plans I have for you, to prosper you, a future, you have a hope. And they rely in me, not in anything else. And it was given in the time of darkness for them, They're heading off to Babylon. They're headed off to exile. And there's times where we wonder, and so we chase other things because life is difficult. And God says, but I know the plans I have for you. I know the plans I have for you. Trust me. Trust me, because not a single, you can't add anything to your life. Don't live for yourselves. Seek me first. The true God who is in charge of all things, who gave his son to die for you. He didn't have to. He didn't have to. Jesus died because he loves us, not because he had to. Nobody forced him to do anything. But then he rose from the dead. That's the God who eats the snake, who is in charge. So we follow and we worship him.